Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to today's presentation. Today, we'll explore the fascinating topic, what is democracy, and why democracy? This is the first of 33 slides, so we'll be diving into the core ideas behind democracy and understanding its importance. We'll look at what democracy really means, why it matters, and how it impacts our lives. So, let's get started and uncover the key concepts together. Let's take a look at the contents of today's presentation. We start with the concept of democracy itself, then move on to how major decisions are made by elected leaders, highlighting their role in governance. We'll explore case studies from different nations, including Zimbabwe, to see how these ideas play out in real-world contexts. Throughout the presentation, we'll discuss arguments both for and against democracy, examining its merits and broader meanings. We will also consider key principles like free and fair electoral competition, the rule of law, and respect for rights. Finally, we'll look at different forms of democracy, such as representative or minimal democracy, to understand the various ways societies organize their political systems. This overview sets the stage for a comprehensive understanding of democracy's complexities and significance. Let's start with the word democracy itself. It actually comes from a Greek word, demokratia. Now, if we break that down, demos means people and kratia means rule. So when we put it all together, democracy essentially means rule by the people. This concept is at the heart of many political systems around the world today. It emphasizes the idea that power and authority should ultimately rest with the citizens. Understanding this origin helps us see why democracy is so important in shaping governments that are accountable and representative of the people's will. Throughout this presentation, we'll explore how democracy functions in practice and why it's considered a foundational element of modern governance. Let's start by understanding what democracy truly means. Essentially, democracy is a form of government where the rulers are elected by the people. This simple definition highlights the core principle that power resides with the citizens, giving them a voice in how the country is run. Now, based on this idea, we can explore the key features that characterize democratic systems. To do this, we'll look at various case studies from different nations. By examining these examples, we can better see how democracy functions in real-world contexts and understand the diverse ways countries implement democratic principles. Throughout this presentation, we'll see how these features uphold the idea that the authority comes from the people and how that shapes governance. So, let's dive into these case studies to see democracy in action and connect these features to our overall theme of understanding different forms of government. Let's take a look at some case studies from different nations to understand the variety of political systems and how they influence governance. Starting with Myanmar, we see a country under army rule, where the military has taken control and plays a dominant role in decision-making. Moving to Pakistan, we have a case with military influence as well, specifically during the time of Pervez Musharraf, who led the country as a military ruler before transitioning to a different form of governance. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe served as the longtime president, representing a leadership style often associated with strong, centralized control. Similarly, in Chile, Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship is a notable example of military rule impacting the political landscape. Turning to China, we see a different model with the Communist Party operating as a one-party system, where political power is concentrated within a single party, limiting political competition. In Nepal and Saudi Arabia, monarchies have traditionally been the governing systems, with royal families holding significant authority and influence over the country's direction. Finally, Mexico's political history includes the dominance of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI, which held power for many decades through a system of institutional control and political stability, shaping the nation's governance. These case studies highlight the diversity in political systems around the world, and understanding them helps us grasp the broader theme of how different nations organize their power structures and the impact on their societies. In this slide, we're looking at some major decisions made by Pakistan's elected leaders, or rather, the lack of elected leadership in this case. In October 1999, General Pervez Musharraf led a military coup, which means he took control of the government by force. This was a significant turning point because he overthrew the democratically elected government, essentially ending civilian rule for the time being. Following this, Musharraf declared himself the chief executive of Pakistan, positioning himself as the country's top leader, bypassing the usual democratic process. Then, in 2002, he held a referendum, a kind of vote, which granted him a 5-year extension in power. This move was controversial because it was seen by many as a way to legitimize his rule. Later that same year, he issued what's called a legal framework order, which amended the Pakistani constitution. This was a crucial step because it allowed him to reshape the legal and political landscape of the country, further consolidating his authority. All these decisions highlight how military influence and executive actions can dramatically impact a nation's political trajectory, especially when democratic processes are sidelined. This connects to the broader theme of how leadership decisions, especially in times of crisis or transition, can shape the course of a country's history. In this slide, we're looking at some of the major decisions made by elected leaders, or rather, the lack of true power they held. According to this order, the president had the authority to dismiss both the national and provincial assemblies, which already indicates a significant concentration of power. Now, the civilian cabinet, which we might expect to be in charge of day-to-day governance, was actually supervised by a National Security Council. And here's the key point. This council was dominated by military officers, not civilians. Even though elections were held for the national and provincial assemblies, which might seem like a step towards democracy, the real power was still with the military. Ultimately, it rested with the military officers and especially with General Musharraf himself. This means that, despite the formal structures of government, the final decision-making authority was in the hands of those who were not elected by the people. This situation clearly challenges the idea of a democratic government, because true democracy relies on elected officials making final decisions. But in this case, those decisions were made by military officials and a military leader. So, it's important to understand that even with elections, the real power dynamics were controlled outside of the democratic process, which is a critical point in understanding the political landscape during this period. Now, let's look at major decisions made by elected leaders. This situation occurs in many dictatorships and monarchies. They might have an elected parliament and government on paper, but the real power often lies elsewhere, typically with those who are not elected. This is a key point because it highlights a gap between official structures and actual control. What this example shows us is actually the first feature of democracy, that elected leaders have real power to make decisions. In a healthy democracy, the elected officials genuinely hold the authority. But in these other systems, even with elections, the true influence might be in the hands of unelected individuals or groups. So, understanding who really holds power helps us gauge whether a system is truly democratic or not. This distinction is critical as we explore the broader theme of how governments operate and how citizens can participate meaningfully. Let's take a closer look at Feature 1. In a democracy, the core idea is that the final decision-making power must rest with those who are elected by the people. This means that the authority to make important decisions isn't concentrated in a few hands or in a small elite. Instead, it's rooted in the will of the people, who choose their representatives through elections. This principle ensures that the government truly reflects the preferences and interests of the citizens. It's a fundamental aspect of democratic governance, emphasizing accountability and the importance of public participation. Ultimately, this connection between elected representatives and the people is what keeps a democracy vibrant and responsive to the needs of its citizens. Let's talk about electoral competition in China. Every 5 years, China holds elections for its parliament, known as the Quanguo Renmin Daibiao Dahui, or the National People's Congress. However, these elections are quite different from what you might see in other democracies. Before a candidate can even contest these elections, they need to get approval from the Chinese Communist Party. This means that the party has significant control over who can run. In fact, only members of the Chinese Communist Party or members of 8 smaller parties allied with it are allowed to participate as candidates. And it's important to note that the government is always formed by the Communist Party. So, while there are elections, the process is tightly controlled, ensuring the party's continued dominance. This setup highlights the distinction between electoral processes and genuine political competition. It's a system that aims to maintain stability and control, but it's quite different from the free and fair electoral competition we often see in other parts of the world. All right, let's take a closer look at Mexico's electoral history. Since 1930, Mexico has held presidential elections every 6 years, establishing a regular cycle of political change. However, for many decades, the landscape was dominated by the PRI, or Institutional Revolutionary Party, which practically always won these elections. In fact, until the year 2000, every single presidential election resulted in a PRI victory. This dominance was maintained through various means, and it's important to understand that opposition parties rarely had a real chance to win. The PRI was known for employing a range of tactics, sometimes dirty tricks, to secure their victory. This included electoral manipulation and other unfair practices that hindered genuine competition. When we think about the overall theme of democratic development, Mexico's experience highlights how important free and fair electoral competition is for a healthy democracy. It shows us that without truly open elections, the legitimacy of the political process can be undermined. So, understanding this history helps us appreciate the significance of the reforms that eventually opened up the political landscape in Mexico. Now, let's take a look at some of the dirty tricks that were used to win elections during this period. First, government employees were often required to attend party meetings, which could be used to sway their opinions or secure their support. This practice blurs the lines between public duty and political influence. Another tactic involved shifting polling booths, which might seem like a minor detail, but actually had significant effects on voter turnout and fairness. Moving the polling stations could make it more difficult for opposition supporters to cast their votes or could be used to favor one candidate over another. Teachers, who are highly trusted in their communities, were sometimes pressured into forcing parents to vote for the PRI. This kind of coercion really undermines the democratic process by turning voting into a kind of obligation rather than a free choice. The PRI, the dominant party at the time, also spent large sums of money to influence the outcome. This financial muscle often translated into extensive campaign resources and sometimes even unfair advantages in the electoral process. Lastly, the media played a significant role. They tended to ignore opposition parties or, worse, criticize them heavily, which created an uneven playing field. When the media doesn't provide fair coverage, it skews public perception and hampers genuine democratic competition. All of these tactics highlight how the ruling party maintained its power through various manipulative strategies, which ultimately compromised the integrity of elections and the democratic process. Let's look at 2 examples, China and Mexico. In China, the political system doesn't really offer serious choices to the people. It's a system where the ruling party maintains control, and citizens don't have the kind of genuine alternatives or competitive elections that define a healthy democracy. On the other hand, in Mexico, the challenge isn't about choosing among multiple parties, but rather about the difficulty of actually defeating the ruling party once it's in power. There, the ruling party has been very entrenched, making it almost impossible for opposition forces to secure victory in elections. From these examples, we can see a common thread, which helps us understand the second key feature of democracy. That feature is the presence of meaningful choices and the possibility of peaceful, competitive change through elections. It's not just about having elections, but about having real options and the chance for power to change hands peacefully. By examining China and Mexico, we see how different limitations can undermine democratic processes, either by restricting choices or by making it impossible to challenge the ruling authority. This helps us appreciate that a true democracy needs both fair competition and genuine options for the people. Let's talk about feature 2, which is fundamental to any democracy. A true democracy must be based on free and fair elections. This means that every eligible voter should have the opportunity to choose their leaders without intimidation or manipulation. It also means that the process itself must be transparent and impartial. Now, an important point here is that those who are currently in power should have a fair chance of losing. This might sound obvious, but it's actually a key indicator of a healthy democracy. If those in power are guaranteed to stay regardless of the vote, then the system isn't truly open or competitive. This principle ensures accountability and encourages leaders to govern effectively, knowing they can be replaced through legitimate elections. Ultimately, this connects to our broader theme. For democracy to thrive, it must be rooted in legitimacy, fairness, and the real possibility of change through the ballot box. Let's talk about the idea of one person, one vote, one value, which is fundamental to fair democratic systems. In many countries around the world, this principle is actually denied or not fully realized. For example, until 2015, women in Saudi Arabia did not have the right to vote, which clearly shows how gender can influence voting rights. Another example is Estonia, where Russian minorities often find it difficult to obtain voting rights, highlighting issues of ethnicity and minority representation. And in Fiji, there's a situation where the vote of an indigenous Fijian has more weight than that of an Indian Fijian, which raises questions about equality and fairness in voting. These examples remind us that achieving equal voting rights is a complex challenge, but it's essential because it ties directly into the broader theme of fairness and equality in democracy. When voting isn't truly equal, it undermines the legitimacy of the entire democratic process. Now, let's talk about feature 3. This principle is all about ensuring that each adult citizen has one vote. It emphasizes the importance of equality in our voting system. Each person's voice should carry equal weight, which means no one's vote should be more powerful than another's. Additionally, it's crucial that each vote has one value, so every vote counts equally and fairly. This helps maintain fairness and prevents any distortions or imbalances in representation. When we look at this in the context of our overall theme, it highlights the fundamental idea of democratic equality, that everyone deserves an equal say in decisions that affect our society. Let's take a look at Zimbabwe and its journey with the rule of law and respect for rights. Zimbabwe gained independence from white minority rule in 1980, marking a significant milestone in its history. Since then, the country has been governed by ZANU-PF, with Robert Mugabe serving as its leader for many years. This transition was a crucial moment, but it also set the stage for ongoing challenges related to governance, human rights, and the rule of law. As we explore the broader themes of governance and rights throughout this presentation, Zimbabwe's experience highlights how political leadership and adherence to legal principles are vital for stability and development. Let's talk about some of the unfair practices that have taken place in elections. One of the key issues has been the frequent changes to the Constitution, often to increase the powers of the president. This kind of manipulation can undermine the democratic process and weaken checks and balances. Additionally, meetings that are supposed to be free and fair were often disrupted, making it difficult for opposition voices to be heard. The government also controlled television and radio, which limited access to unbiased information and influenced public perception. Court judgments were ignored whenever they didn't favor those in power, showing a blatant disregard for the rule of law. Opposition party workers faced harassment, which discouraged political competition and silenced dissent. Public protests and demonstrations, which are a vital part of democratic expression, were declared illegal, silencing the voices of ordinary citizens. Journalists, who play a crucial role in holding power accountable, were also harassed, further limiting transparency. All of these practices collectively undermine the fairness of elections and threaten the very foundation of democracy. Let's take a closer look at Zimbabwe and the importance of basic rights. The state should respect fundamental freedoms of its citizens. This means people should have the freedom to think independently, hold their own opinions, and express those opinions openly in public. It's also essential that individuals can form associations, join groups, and even protest peacefully to voice their concerns. These rights are crucial for a healthy democracy. Additionally, everyone should be treated equally under the law, no matter who they are. Equality is a core principle that ensures fairness and justice for all citizens. To safeguard these rights, it's vital that an independent judiciary exists, meaning the courts must be free from political influence so they can fairly protect citizens' freedoms. Connecting this to our overall theme, respecting these rights and ensuring equality and independence in the legal system are key foundations for a stable and just society. Without these protections, the very fabric of democracy can be undermined, which is why they're so important for Zimbabwe and any nation striving for good governance. Feature 4 is about how a democratic government operates. It's important to understand that even though a democracy gives power to the people, that power isn't absolute. Instead, it's exercised within certain boundaries. These boundaries are set by constitutional law, which acts as a framework to ensure that the government functions fairly and consistently. At the same time, the rights of citizens are protected within this system. These rights include freedoms like speech, assembly, and voting, which are fundamental to democracy. So, the key idea here is that democracy isn't just about majority rule. It's also about respecting laws and rights that safeguard individual freedoms and limit governmental power. This balance helps maintain stability and fairness, reinforcing the overall theme that a true democracy depends on both the rule of law and the protection of citizens' rights. So, let's take a moment to review what we mean by democracy. Essentially, democracy is a form of government where the key idea is that the rulers are elected by the people. This means that the power lies with the citizens, who have the right to choose their leaders through voting. The most important concept here is that democracy emphasizes participation and representation. It's about giving people a voice in how they're governed. As we've seen throughout this presentation, understanding this definition helps us grasp why democratic systems are valued for promoting fairness and accountability. Ultimately, democracy is about ensuring that the government serves the people's interests, with leaders accountable to those they represent. Now, let's talk about the key features that define a democracy. First, the final decision-making power must rest with those elected by the people. This means that the ultimate authority comes from the citizens themselves, not from any other source. Next, in a democracy, every adult citizen is entitled to one vote, and each vote carries equal weight. This ensures fairness and equality in the political process. It's also crucial that democracy is built on free and fair elections. This means that those currently in power should have a genuine chance of losing, which keeps leaders accountable and maintains the integrity of the system. Lastly, a democratic government operates within the limits set by constitutional law and respects citizens' rights. These legal and constitutional boundaries protect individual freedoms and ensure that the government doesn't overstep its authority. All these points tie back to the core idea that democracy is about power being derived from the people, with fairness, equality, and respect for laws at its foundation. Now, let's look at some of the arguments against democracy, focusing on its demerits. First, one of the main issues is that leaders tend to keep changing in a democracy. This constant change can lead to political instability, making it difficult for the country to have consistent policies and long-term planning. Secondly, democracy often revolves around political competition and power struggles. While this keeps leaders accountable, it also means that morality can sometimes take a backseat. The focus shifts more to winning votes and gaining power rather than doing what is morally right. And thirdly, because democracy involves consulting a large number of people, decision-making can become slow. The process of gathering opinions, debating, and reaching consensus can cause delays, especially in urgent situations where quick action is needed. So, while democracy has many strengths, these are some of the challenges that can affect its effectiveness. Now, let's look at some of the arguments against democracy. Some people believe that elected leaders don't always know what is truly in the best interest of the people. As a result, this can lead to poor decision-making. Another concern is that democracy, because it relies on electoral competition, can sometimes foster corruption. When politicians are focused on winning votes, they might prioritize short-term gains or personal interests over the public good. Lastly, there's the view that ordinary people don't always know what is good for them. So, some argue that they shouldn't be the ones making critical decisions about governance. These points highlight the ongoing debate about the effectiveness and potential pitfalls of democratic systems. Let's talk about some arguments in favor of democracy. One of the main reasons is that a democratic government tends to be a better government because it is more accountable to its people. When people have the power to vote and voice their opinions, leaders are more likely to serve the needs of the citizens. For example, let's look at the famine in China from 1958 to 1961, which was the worst recorded famine in world history. Nearly 3 crore people lost their lives there. In contrast, India, despite facing many challenges, did not experience a famine on that scale during the same period. The key difference lay in their policies. India had a food security system, held multi-party elections, had opposition parties, and a free press that could criticize the government. This example clearly shows that democratic rulers are more attentive to the needs of the people. Because their power depends on public support, they are more likely to implement policies that benefit the larger population. This is a fundamental reason why democracy is considered a better form of government, because it keeps leaders connected to the people's needs and ensures they are held accountable. Let's talk about some of the arguments in favor of democracy, starting with its impact on decision-making. Democracy is fundamentally built on consultation and discussion. When making important decisions, a democratic process involves many people coming together, having discussions, and holding meetings. This collaborative approach allows different perspectives to be heard. When a group of people put their heads together, they can identify potential mistakes or flaws that might not be obvious to an individual. Yes, this process takes more time, but the key advantage is that it significantly reduces the chances of rushing into rash or irresponsible decisions. So, in essence, democracy promotes better, more thoughtful decisions by encouraging collective input and careful deliberation. This ties back to our overall theme of how democratic systems strive to create fairer, more effective governance. Arguments for democracy. Number 3, it provides a method to deal with differences and conflicts. You see, people are naturally bound to have different opinions and interests. In India, for example, we come from various regions, speak different languages, practice different religions, and belong to different castes. These differences can sometimes lead to clashes between groups, but democracy offers a peaceful way to address these issues. It ensures that there is no permanent winner or loser, allowing everyone to have their say and find common ground. This way, democracy helps maintain harmony despite our diversity, which is crucial for a united nation. Let's talk about how democracy really enhances the dignity of citizens. At its core, democracy is built on the principle of political equality. This means that, regardless of whether someone is poor or wealthy, educated or not, they all have the same status and rights. It recognizes that every individual's voice matters equally. In a democracy, people are not simply subjects of a ruler or a government. They are actually the rulers themselves. This shifts the power directly to the people, making everyone responsible for the decisions that shape their society. And even when citizens make mistakes or disagree, they are still responsible for their actions. This accountability is a fundamental part of democratic life. So, overall, democracy isn't just about voting. It's about respecting each person's dignity and recognizing their role as active participants in the governance of their community. This theme of equality and responsibility is what truly underpins the value of democracy in our society. Let's talk about some arguments in favor of democracy. One key point is that democracy is better than other forms of government because it can correct its own mistakes. Unlike other systems, where errors might be hidden or ignored, democratic processes make it harder to conceal errors for long. There's always room for public discussion, which helps bring mistakes to light and allows for correction. If a decision turns out to be wrong, either the rulers need to change their decision, or, if they refuse, the people can change the rulers altogether. This flexibility is a major advantage. Of course, democracy isn't perfect and can't solve all problems or provide everything we want. But compared to other options we know, it's clearly the better choice. It offers a mechanism for continuous improvement and accountability, which is essential for good governance. A democratic government is considered a better form of government mainly because it is more accountable. When leaders are elected by the people, they have a duty to listen and respond to the needs of citizens. This accountability helps ensure that the government works in the interest of the people it serves. Democracy also improves the quality of decision-making. Since it involves multiple perspectives and encourages debate, it tends to lead to more well-rounded and thoughtful choices. This collaborative approach helps avoid hasty or biased decisions. Another key advantage is that democracy provides a method to handle differences and conflicts peacefully. Through elections, discussions, and legal processes, diverse opinions can be addressed constructively, reducing the chances of violence or unrest. Democracy also enhances the dignity of citizens. When people have a say in how they are governed, they feel respected and valued, which boosts their confidence and sense of belonging. Finally, one of the most important points is that democracy is better than other forms of government because it can correct its own mistakes. When citizens notice flaws or errors, they can demand change through voting or peaceful protests, helping the system improve over time. All these merits show how democracy, by being accountable and inclusive, supports a fairer and more effective government, aligning with our overall theme of empowering citizens and promoting good governance. Now, when we talk about the broader meaning of democracy, the most common form we see today is what we call a representative democracy. Modern democracies, as you might imagine, are simply too large and complex for everyone to sit together and make decisions collectively. It's just not physically possible. Even if it were, most people don't have the time, the desire, or the specialized skills needed to participate in every decision that affects their lives and their country. So, instead, we elect representatives, trusted individuals who make decisions on our behalf. This system allows us to have a say in governance without the impracticality of direct involvement in every matter. It's a practical adaptation of the democratic ideal, ensuring that democracy remains functional and responsive in our large, interconnected societies. And of course, this connects back to the overall theme. Democracy isn't just about voting. It's about ensuring that power is exercised in a way that reflects the people's will, even if not every person is directly involved in every decision. When we talk about democracy, it's important to understand that there's a broader meaning beyond just voting or elections. A true democratic decision involves more than just ticking a box. It requires consultation with those affected, and ideally, their consent. This principle applies not only to governments, but also to families or any kind of organization. If we take these ideals seriously, it actually becomes clear that no country in the world fully meets this broader standard. This helps us see the difference between a minimal form of democracy, what we might see on paper, and a truly good democracy that genuinely respects everyone's voice and participation. So, when we think about democracy more broadly, we're reminded that there's always room for improvement, and that the real goal is to foster decisions that truly consider and include all those impacted. This idea ties into the overall theme of striving for more genuine and meaningful democratic practices everywhere. Today, let's talk about what we call representative or minimal democracy. This is actually the most common form of democracy around the world today. In this system, people don't directly make all the decisions themselves. Instead, they choose representatives through elections who then make decisions on their behalf. It's a practical way to manage governance in large populations. Now, you might wonder, is direct democracy ever possible? Well, it is, but only in very small societies, like a Gram Sabha in a village, where everyone can come together and participate directly in decision-making. It's also important to recognize that no country today has a perfect democracy. Every system has its flaws and challenges. And finally, we see other forms of government, such as monarchies, dictatorships, or one-party states, that don't require all citizens to take part in politics. These systems often concentrate power in the hands of a few or a single ruler, which is quite different from democratic ideals. So, understanding these different forms helps us see where our own democracy fits in the larger picture of governance around the world.